Friends, good afternoon. I'm so sorry not to have been with you this morning for your Leading Well Day. You know I try to make a priority of these occasions. And I'm sorry to be recording my own input and not presenting it to you live. The pandemic has interrupted our plans and expectations in so many different ways, hasn't it? But one of the consequences, as you'll be well aware, is the postponement of the ordinations that should have taken place in June and are now due to take place this coming weekend. So I've been down at the cathedral this morning with the ordinands, rehearsing ahead of Saturday and Sunday and Monday. And although we've cancelled the ordinands lunch, which would normally take place for them and their families here at Bishopscroft right about now, the window of opportunity for me to get home from the cathedral and join you just seemed too tight. So I've recorded my input instead. And you'll know that I like on these occasions just to try and get off the beaten track of Scripture just a little bit. So today I want to look at one strand in the life of King David, a series of three short passages in which we get an insight into his dealings with an opponent, a man called Shimei, son of Gera. The first of the three passages is in 2 Samuel chapter 16, beginning at verse 5. And this is the moment in the story of the life of David when Absalom's rebellion is underway, and David has been forced to flee from Jerusalem. And as he leaves, Shimei, son of Gera, comes and taunts the retreating David, throwing stones and insults at him and shouting, "Out, out, murderer, a scoundrel, the Lord has avenged on all of you the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned, and the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. See, disaster has overtaken you, for you are a man of blood." And one of David's bodyguards, a man called Abishai, son of Zeruiah, says to David, "Should you want me to go over and chop off his head?" And David responds with great generosity and magnanimity, and says, "No, actually, do you know, he may be speaking the word of the Lord at this point," which is an interesting kind of a reaction because we know from the story as a whole that the Lord is not in fact removing the throne from David and giving it to Absalom. At this point, we know that David isn't regarded by the Lord as a man of blood because he took the throne from Saul. In fact, the story is at great pains to protect David from any accusation that he raised his hand against Saul. He always treated Saul as the Lord's anointed. But on the other hand, David is a man of blood, guilty. He is a murderer, guilty of the murder of Uriah the Hittite, and we do know that part of the judgment that the prophet Nathan pronounced on King David was precisely that trouble for David would be raised up from within his own house. And what's important to note is that at this particular moment in the story, David doesn't leap to his own defence. He's more attentive to what his opponent is saying that might be true than what his opponent is saying about him, which might be untrue. He's impressive at this point in wanting to hear the word of the Lord, even in the midst of the stone flinging and the mud slinging, if you like, even in the midst of the insults and the curses. Doesn't rush to defend himself, but tries to tune in to hear what there might be here for him in the words of his opponent, which amounts to a word from the Lord. So then comes the sequel, just a couple of chapters later, actually in 2 Samuel chapter 19, beginning at verse 16. Absalom's rebellion is now over. Absalom is dead, and David is returning to Jerusalem to resume royal authority there. And as he approaches the Jordan, lo and behold, there's Shimei, a son of Gera. And Shimei in a very different sort of a mood, no longer flinging out insults, but coming contrite, falling down before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan and saying, "May my Lord not hold me guilty, or remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. May the king not bear it in mind, for your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore, see, I have come this day, first of all the house of Joseph, to come and meet my lord the king." And true to form, Abishai, son of Zeruiah, leaps up, full of violent instincts, and says to David, "Shall Shimei not be put to death for this, because he's cursed the Lord's anointed?" And again, David responds with great magnanimity, great generosity and mercy, and says, "No, this is a day of celebration. This is not a day on which anyone should die, because now I know I am again king in Israel." And he gives his promise to Shimei that he will not die. So again, we encounter David at his most statesmanlike, rising above petty grudge bearing, able to hold out to his opponent the hand of forgiveness. It's all very impressive, but unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. And the last part in this mini trilogy comes in the first book of Kings, chapter 2, when we encounter David on his deathbed. Now, if you have been diligently following the daily appointed readings at morning prayer, you'll have heard parts of this story. You'll have heard the first part of the story, and you'd have heard the second part of the story, but in one of those really dreadful, ill-judged bits of editorial intervention that the compilers of the lectionary are prone to, they cut out the sequel, the final instalment of this mini-drama, in 1 Kings chapter 2. So although we got most of David's deathbed speech, we absolutely did not get the bit of his deathbed speech which refers to Shimei, son of Gerar. So on his deathbed, David summons Solomon and addresses him. And in the first, 4 verses of 1 Kings chapter 2, David is again at his most impressive as he bequeaths his throne to his son. He urges him to serve the Lord with all his heart and all his soul and all his strength, and to walk in the way of the Lord's commandments. David is saying absolutely the sort of things that you and I might want for him to say. But in verses 5 to 9 of 1 Kings chapter 2, David's speech takes a darker turn, and he effectively summons his son Solomon to ensure the execution, first of all, of Joab, who had once been David's commander-in-chief and then had betrayed him and become Absalom's commander-in-chief, but then also of Shimei. "There is also with you," David says, "Shimei, son of Gerar, the Benjaminite from Bahurim, who cursed me with a terrible curse on the day when I went down to Mahanaim. But when he came down to meet me at the Jordan, I swore to him by the Lord, I will not put you to death with the sword. Therefore do not hold him guiltless, for you are a wise man. You will know what you ought to do to him, and you must bring his grey head down with him with blood to Sheol." I don't know about you, but I found that a really disappointing finale. It's true that Shimei will have known that David's death was a moment of vulnerability for him, just as Joseph's brothers feared for their future at the death of Jacob, just as Jonathan had urged David to promise that their covenant of mutual care would extend even after Jonathan's death. But what we might hope to read here is surely for David to say, "Now then, Solomon, don't forget that I promised Shimei on the banks of the Jordan that he would not die, so please don't kill him just because I've gone." Instead, David misquotes his promise in attempts to evade its obligations, or so it seems to me, and conspires to give his son room to do what he himself had refrained from doing. "I promised Shimei that I would not kill him," he says, "but that doesn't mean that you can't do it." And we know from the end of 2 Kings chapter 2 that Solomon did indeed carry through with that execution. Now, it seems to me that not only in the light of Jesus, but of course in the light of the nature of God revealed in the Old Testament, that's to say, the God who is the Lord, gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, it seems to me that this is a sad end to David's story. It's as if he finds himself falling short, ultimately, of the vision of leadership he knew that the Lord had set before him. And this is salutary. It is not enough in leadership to do the right thing once. It's necessary to do the right thing again and again and again and again, so that it becomes the habit of one's character. But nevertheless, I find David's story an encouragement. It is this David who fell short, who can still be described in Acts 13, verse 22, as a man after God's own heart. You don't have to be perfect to be the object of God's delight. This encourages me. It seems to me that the issue for those of us who are leaders here is probably this, that behaving nobly in the face of opposition, behaving magnanimously, can be costly to us in our souls. It can create a deficit in our souls which aches for redress. The decision to be magnanimous may have a legacy, and it's no good just paying attention to the moment of decision. We have to pay attention to the potential legacy that aches for redress. So there's a constant need in this area, it seems for me, for great self-awareness in the leader and above all in the Christian leader. And I get the feeling that David did not hold those shadow side feelings, those emotions of resentment before the Lord in his prayers over the years. He did not seek, it seems to me, the Spirit's help in enabling him to find some peaceful resolution. So that on his deathbed, what pours out is the result of many years of inattention to that nagging feeling. So I offer you this story as an almost but not quite illustration of undefended leadership. In the moment when he is assailed by Shimei, David behaves as we might hope that one called of God would behave, and in the immediate aftermath too, when Shimei comes back contrite, we see David rising above petty self-interest to hold out the hand of fellowship to a former opponent. But somehow that was so costly to him that he harboured the need for revenge right up until his deathbed. And I wonder how that story could have, how differently that story could have gone if in the years between his second encounter with Shimei and his death, he had held his feelings, his bloodlust, his desire for revenge before the Lord.